All right. Getting everything set up here. How come? All right. Hopefully you can see the notes here. Okay. Well, today, Lord willing, the goal is just this will be our last time together this year. We'll gather together again beginning of February. So we'll take some time off for the holidays, and then I'll be serving in Pakistan for a couple weeks in February, so or in January. So we'll gather back together again February for any of you who are interested, and look at prophecy. Talk about the prophetic genre. Look at some key passages. Talk about some issues related to eschatology, and just kind of see where that takes us for those of you that want to do that, be interested in that. So the first week in February is the plan. I think it's the 3rd or 4th. I forget what the specific date is, but I'll send information out on that as well. So hopefully today, then, we can finish our discussion of narratives, looking at John 4. It's our example, and just talk about the sermon side of things and the preaching of narratives. Let's review a few things, get your input and feedback. All right. So with that, here's the whole process as we looked at it, and we've considered each of the steps and gone through, say, narrative. And what I want to look at now is sort of again, talk about the homiletical idea to start us off. And homiletical idea is just trying to parallel with the exegetical idea. If you remember, the exegetical idea is the author's intended meaning, and the homiletical idea, so that's what we come to after doing our study in exegesis and all of these steps previously. The first 8 steps leads us to the exegetical idea, which we call the author's what, why, how, all right, in the past. And I wanted to be more specific and refer to it as the exegetical idea. And in comparison, or similar to, when we go to the sermon, we then present the homiletical idea. So the exegetical idea is the author's intended meaning. The homiletical idea is your sermon main point and outline. All right. So it sort of parallels in that way. It is based upon, obviously, the exegetical idea, but of course, in preaching the sermon, you want to direct your sermon towards your hearers. The exegetical idea is directed towards the original audience. The homiletical idea then is directed towards your audience and your hearers. So we'll look at that in a minute. But when putting the sermon together, that first step is to come up with the homiletical idea, which again is comprised of, it's made up of the sermon main point and the sermon outline. So just by way of review for us, the sermon main point. All right, who can tell me what that is? Anybody want to offer maybe a simple definition or explanation of the main point of a sermon, and why is it important? Hence, you want to start us off?
It includes the summary of all your desired subject or desired idea to be able to communicate to your listeners, and at the same time the purpose why you want to preach such sermon, such message based on the text.
Okay, good. Based on the text. All right, good. Anyone want to add to that or modify it? I know this may seem as a basic question, but it's important always to bring us back to this, because this is where your sermon starts. All right, with the main point. Okay. Many refer to it, I refer to as the main idea, the big idea, the propositional statement, the sermon concept, the fallen condition focus is what Brian Chappell calls it. But all of those just refer to it's a summary of your message into a short statement, something that people can hold on to, something that people can see. This is the main idea of the message. John MacArthur said this. Renee, can you read this? This is John MacArthur's statement regarding a sermon main point. Can you see it okay?
Tim, can you zoom in a bit more?
Yeah, here, let me make it a little bigger. All right, how's that? Can you see that okay, Renee? Or... All right, let me make it a little bigger here. There we go.
Hasn't changed.
Really?
Yeah.
That's strange. Here, let me. How about now?
Nope.
That's
At
weird.
least not in my.
Let me do this. Oh, you know what? How about now?
Oh, that is big. They can read that in Manila.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I was opening the wrong notes.
Okay. First of all, make sure that every expository message has a single theme that is crystal clear so that your people know exactly what you are saying, how you have supported it, and how it is applied to their lives.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So notice here a single theme. So it's focused and it's crystal clear. All right. And so for an expository sermon, that is a sermon that is explaining a passage based upon the author's intended meaning. The preacher explains that, and he does that by focusing, summarizing that into a single theme that is clear, crystal clear. And I think this is overlooked often, and not enough time is usually spent on this. Once you've collected all that information and from your exegesis, and you've looked at the timeless truths, you've looked at all of these elements, the homiletical idea is often not given much attention. And I think that it's the most important first step in preparing the sermon. You got to know, where are you aiming it? What is the particular focus that you're trying to accomplish through it? So, and I would also encourage you to remember the goal of a good or effective sermon main point is, I would say, 4 things. All right. 1, it needs to be accurate. That goes without saying, right? You must understand the passage, understand the authorial intent. And secondly, it's important first that you understand the text and that you're accurate, but then your job is to help your hearers understand the text. And that means you need to be clear. And that's why I like what Pastor John says, crystal clear, that the main point is crystal clear. And it needs to be directed, aimed towards your hearers. All right, if you're preaching on the Great Commission, you don't say just Jesus gives the Great Commission to his disciples. That would be accurate. That would be clear, but it's not directed. It's not calling your hearers to do something with that. So you want to make sure that your sermon main point is directed to your hearers. And then finally, that it is memorable. All right, memorable. So again, for example, if you're preaching on the Great Commission, you could have Jesus, if you had Jesus gives the Great Commission. All right, that is clear, that is accurate, It's not very directed, and it's memorable only because it's short. But what if we made something like this? Make the master's mission your mission. How about that? See the difference? Notice one thing, it still is accurate. It's focusing on the mission of Christ. I think it's clear. But notice it is very directed, right? Make. This is a call to do something. And then I think it's more memorable because, we use the word M, so it's an alliteration. Make, master, mission, mission. All right. And so I'm sure there's better ones out there for this, but you get the idea. We want to move from, we want to make our sermon main points clear and also memorable. And so give it some time. Think about ways to do that. One way that's effective in English is to, be using a similar letter or words that sound alike. Those are ways that in English we can make an effective sermon main point. The same goes, by the way, for your outline points. Now, with well, I'll hold that off on that. Okay, so the goal of a good or effective sermon main point is these 4 elements: accurate, clear, directed, and memorable. All right, any questions or comments about that? Just sort of reviewing some things here. Now, even though we've been studying narrative, there's still a sermon main point, right? Because there's a main point to the story. And that is the author's exegetical idea, his main point. But then we want to take that main point and apply it to our hearers. All right. So narratives, every biblical genre, there will be a main idea, an exegetical idea that we need to then derive, gives a homiletical idea from that.
Yeah. And Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm speaking for myself, what I'm challenged most here in what you're saying is basically making it succinct enough to be memorable.
Yep.
I tend to be a little on the wordy side in presenting the sermon main point, especially in the introduction. So it takes effort to be able to do something as succinct as what you just did here. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, you're right. I had one of my professors in my doctor of ministry program. He spent time talking about, he actually said he gives 1 or 2 hours for each sermon to come up with his main point. Like wow. Okay, well, because he saw it as so important that he would spend time. He said, what I would do is when I was ready to put my sermon together after all my study and prayer, and he said I would go out for a walk, and I walk for an hour, at least an hour, and on that walk I would go over in my head different main points. He would have a general idea, right? Like, we're studying the Great Commission. We know the focus is the Great Commission, but then he would try to come up with something that was, fit these qualities. So he said a lot of times it would take him 1 or 2 hours to put that together. He felt it was so important. And listening to his sermons, I would say that, yeah, it was effective. He helped me a lot to really think more about this, to give more attention to this, because if you can make it memorable, right, that's what we want at the end of the day, right? We want the people to leave kind of having an idea of what the main point of the sermon was, right? Otherwise, what were we doing all week? But it's hard. It's a skill, and it is something that may take a little bit of time to consider. So, but that's a good point, Robbie. That's exactly the challenge. And the challenge too is when you try to make it memorable, you don't want to dilute its accuracy or clarity, right? So you can come up with some really clever, memorable phrase or statement, but the danger is not being as clear or accurate by doing that. So there's always the tension there. I want to make sure first it's accurate, second it's clear, and then to do that and also make it memorable and directed. That's where the challenge is.
Yeah. Sometimes I think in the effort to make it memorable, what happens is that sometimes some preachers compromise a bit on the clarity and the accuracy of the main point to the passage, especially when we're trying to like what you did, come up with similar letter types of words or similar sounding type of words. Sometimes it gets forced.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're right. That's exactly right. So I think for me, I first start with, when I'm doing this, okay, I want to be accurate and clear. That's my priority. All right. So I just start with that. So I come up with a main point that meets those criteria. That's accurate, accurately reflects the passage, and that it's clear. And then I go from there, because I always say, well, worst case, I'll just use this one. It may not be the best, but at least I know it's accurate and clear. And then I'll try different options as far as looking at other ways to make it more memorable. But to me, some guys work at making it memorable and they'll sacrifice accuracy or clarity to do it. And that's, we can't do, because the priority is not memorable. Priority is accurate and clear. They can listen to the sermon again, if they, forget certain things, but I think it can be done. It's just, prayerfully pursuing it, asking the Lord for help, and then giving some time to it. And some guys are just better at it than others, Harris isn't with us on this call, but Harris is really good at this. I remember he and Eric were in the Davao group, and they were just really good at coming up with memorable statements, even in class, where I describe some particular topic, and then they come up with some alliteration like on the spot.
Yes.
I have some in the notes, in the preaching notes. I use some of theirs. So, but some people are good at it, others aren't. And English, I think, is a helpful language because there are a lot of vocabulary words to use. English has a pretty broad vocabulary base. So I don't know, I'm not an expert in other languages, but I do know, at least for English, you can usually find synonyms or words that sound similarly. They're without sacrificing much on accuracy. So anyway, don't mean to belabor the point, but just want to remind us all. So this is applied not only for the sermon main point, but also your outline points. You want those also to be accurate, clear, directed, and memorable as best you can. All right. In that order of priority. Accuracy first, then clarity, then direct it towards your hearers, and then make it memorable. All right. Okay. So what I thought we'd do is, before doing that for John 4, we haven't read the story in a while. So I thought first, let's just read the story again together, and then we'll look at some possible homiletical ideas. Pastor Robbie needs to step out for a little bit, no problem. So I'm going to start maybe with Brother Manny. If you could read for us. Let me pull up the passage. If you could read, there we go. John, the verses 1 to 6 of chapter 1. And then after Manny, if Pastor Ince, if you could read the next paragraph there, 7 to 12, then BJ, 13 to 19, Renee, 20 to 26. Then we'll come back to Manny for 27 to 32, etc. All right, so let's just do it that way. Manny, can you start us off?
Yes, Pastor.
Thank you.
Verses 1 to 6. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judea and went again into Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour.
Verse
All right.
7, 12.
Yes.
There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Therefore the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." She said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? You are not greater than our father Jacob, are you, who gave us the well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle?"
Verse 13, Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Verse 15, the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband.' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." Verse 19, the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet."
Verses 20 to 26. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. For salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, and now is, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshippers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he."
All right.
Verse-
Sorry, Manny, I just realized that Tom was here. I'm going to give him this.
Okay.
And then Manny, you can pick up verse 33. Tom, can you read verse 27 to 32?
Verse 27, at this point his disciples came, and they were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman. Yet no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why do you speak with her?" So the woman left her water pot and went into the city and said to the men, Come, see the man who told me all the things that I have done. This is not the Christ, is it? They went out of the city and were coming to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about.
Okay, Manny.
Verse 33. So the disciples were saying to one another, no one brought him anything to eat, did he? Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white for harvest. Verse 36. Already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this case the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have not entered into their labor.
All right. And then
39.
Vince, you want to take it?
39. From that city, many of the Samaritans believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, he told me all the things that I had done. So when the Samaritans came to Jesus, they were asking him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of his word. And they were saying to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves and know that this one is indeed the Savior of the world.
All right. I know we've read this story quite a few times, but this is a great story. I just really encouraged by this story. So several weeks back, we identified the exegetical idea. So I'll just summarize it for you from what we determined. I think it was session 50 or 51. But basically, again, the focus of the story, right, is on the mission. It begins with Jesus saying, you know, we must, or the narrator said that he must go to Samaria. And so the focus is the mission of Jesus, who is sent by the Father to seek and save the lost, you know, despite their background. And really this story, if you remember in the context of the book of John, sits in contrast to Jesus's dialogue with Nicodemus back in John 3, right? Nicodemus, he was a guy, right? He was at the top of the social ladder. This woman is at the bottom of the social ladder, right? So there's this contrast with the Pharisee, male, man who is in discussion with Jesus, and then this Samaritan woman who is in immorality. And so Jesus really flips this whole story on the disciples and challenges them if they have the same mission or same mindset as Jesus does. And so we sort of, that's kind of an overview from the plot really of the story. And so we came up with the exegetical idea here, the author's what, why, how, as the what was Jesus the Messiah was sent on a mission to bring salvation to all, a mission he intends for his disciples as well. So that's just the what I believe, looked on the plot, all the study we have done just summarizes the John's point in this story. Now, why does he want to make that point clear that Jesus is a Messiah sent on a mission? To show that he's the Savior of all people. And again, connecting it to John's purpose for his gospel to demonstrate that he is both the Christ and, if you remember, the Christ and the Son of God, right? That was from his purpose statement. And the outline, the author's outline, John's outline, is basically an introduction, which gives a setting, and then those three scenes that are broken into the three groups that Jesus interacts with. The woman at the well, that's a key interaction. The disciples, where the point of the story comes out. If you remember, this story isn't just about the woman, it's really about how Jesus is approaching those from another culture with the message that he's the Messiah, and that the disciples needed to embrace that same mentality and heart. And that's what I think the point of the story is. That's why it includes that discussion with the disciples. And then finally, there's the interaction with the Samaritan village, where it shows the amazing response, of course, that many of them believe that Jesus is in fact the Messiah. And we talked about too, I think, that this woman may have been the first person, at least that's recorded in the Gospels, that Jesus actually explicitly told that he was the Messiah. Later, up in Nazareth, on this journey up to Nazareth, we learn in Luke chapter 4 that Jesus does declare to those in the synagogue that he is the Messiah. But I think chronologically, this may be the first statement. I guess in John 1, there was an allusion to it. He was named the Messiah and he didn't deny it. But anyway, very interesting that he tells this woman explicitly he is the Messiah. Any case, so this was sort of the what, why, how, the exegetical idea that we came up from the passage. Now, I want to have you guys think about what might be, and then the timeless truth, which we also discussed before, was that this passage really centers around the Great Commission, that we are on a mission to make disciples of all the nation. And in the story, Jesus wanted his disciples to embrace, to recognize that mission. And so I think that's a timeless truth upon which this passage is built, that the Great Commission, that one statement, right? We're to make disciples of all the nations, probably with an emphasis on of all the nations in this particular story, that is the timeless truth upon which this passage is based. And thus our sermon concept would need to reflect that. So with that in mind, recognizing the author's intended meaning, I want you guys to give some thought to how might you put together a main point for this story. If you're preaching John 4, how would you first put, what kind of sermon main point would you put together? All right, I'll give you a minute to think about that, and then give you guys opportunity to express some of your ideas. All right. Okay, anybody want to sort of offer up their idea? What would be a sermon point? Again, remember, our goal is accurate, clear, directed, and memorable if possible. And I know we haven't had a lot of time to think about it, but let's just see what we come up with here. Anyone want to offer their idea? And we won't be critical. All right, we're just kind of brainstorm together here. And you got something?
Pastor? Yeah. Participating in Christ's mission to save lost sinners.
Okay, good. That incorporates the study of mission, save lost sinners. All right, good. That's a good start. Anyone else want to offer theirs or maybe modify this one or?
Pastor Tim, let me try the expansive work of the gospel.
Okay. Expansive work of the gospel. All right, good. Expansive, sort of incorporating the idea of all the nations, the gospel for all the nations. All right, good. Any others? How about you, Renee? You have any other thoughts or ideas?
The gospel for all people, or the gospel must be shared to all people, like that.
Okay. Good. Good. I like in this one, you're kind of making it more directive. You say must be shared. That kind of is calling the hearers to a response. So that's good. And all people, again, that captures the essence of the story, that it's all nations, including, even the Samaritans in the story, but that the principle is Christ wants to reach all nations. And even the last statement, right, that he's the savior of the world, the Samaritan man said. Good. Anybody else have any further thoughts about this?
Pastor, may I try?
Yes, go ahead.
The gospel is not limited to us, it's for everyone.
All right. Okay, good. So I notice all you guys have, you mentioned either the gospel or Christ's mission. So that's important. And then again, everyone, all people, expansive. All right, that incorporates the idea that John was trying to make, that how about this one? Since it's a story, what if we put the main idea in the form of a question? Let me make it bigger. Are you actively making disciples of all the nations? Sometimes you can use the main point in the form of a question. Because that was really, Jesus was exhorting the disciples to be doing that. So really, if we want to turn the story and aim it towards our hearers, I thought, well, what if we just did that in the form of a question as we come to the end of the story and say, this passage isn't just about the disciples needing to recognize the gospel, making disciples is for all the nations. How are you doing that? Because if we were there with the disciples on that road, Jesus would have directed this towards us as well, right? He said, I've been sent, and so I'm sending you. And we know that. Why? Because of the Great Commission. Jesus said, make disciples of all the nations. Now, the disciples weren't able to do that. They didn't go around the entire earth. So their work is not finished. And he said, make disciples of all the nations. And at the end, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And so again, the disciples, they had all died. So we know that the mission of Christ is passed on to us. And so that's why I know if we were there with the disciples, it'd be the same instruction he would give to us. So that's one thought. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts? Other ideas? Maybe a similar one to what you guys have said, which I'll make it more directed. That is, be actively engaged in Christ's mission to reach all the lost. All right, and you guys had that more or less in what you said, so kind of just made it more explicit and more directed. Be engaged or be actively engaged in Christ's mission. Now, this might not be memorable. We'd have to work at that. But again, the idea, at least I would say, in my opinion, it's accurate. It is clear and it is directed. So we need to still need to work at making it memorable. I don't know. What do you guys think? Especially these last two that I offered up there. How would you critique those? How would you modify them or make them better? Anyone want to make a suggestion? Vance, you got any ideas or thoughts?
Well, I think, Pastor, yeah, I got your point also in putting it into a question. It makes me get to already thinking about how I would answer that myself as I listen to your sermon.
Yeah, once in a while, I would put the main point in the form of a question. That really makes it directed and applicational. So that's an option. But hopefully, yeah.
Go ahead.
BJ.
Sorry, sir. Go ahead, sir.
No. That's
Pastor
fine.
Tim, is it possible to make the main point also your title? So at least you keep repeating it throughout the sermon. Is it possible for you to state that as your title also?
Yeah, certainly. The title, is supposed to capture the main idea of the sermon as well, or can. For narratives, I would probably, we're going to talk in a minute about preaching narratives. So I might be a little bit vague on the title, because in a narrative, well, I'm going to hold that. All right, I'll explain what I mean later. Generally speaking, yeah, a sermon title is usually a good summary of the message that you could use as a main point. For narratives, I might do something a little bit different, which I'll explain when we talk about preaching narratives. All right. So ask that question again if I don't address it a little bit later. Manny, you got any thoughts? Do you, especially from the last two that I offered, any suggestions or critiques on that, Manny?
Pastor, I'm already thinking about my title.
Oh, okay. Do you have a title?
Well, something like mission mission Israel, Samaria, and the rest of the world.
Mission Israel, Samaria,
Samaria.
ends of the earth, right?
And the yes,
Like the
that,
Acts,
something like
the
that.
Acts 1:8, yeah. Or if you want to even be more clever, you could just say Mission Acts 1:8. Then you could explain it
Yeah.
in the sermon, right? Okay, good. All right. So these just meant to give an idea of taking what we want to do is identify the timeless truth as underlying the passage. You know, what is the author's main point, and how is that point connected to the timeless truth? And I think in studying this story from John, we really see an emphasis there. Jesus wanting his disciples to understand they're on a mission, the same mission as him, essentially, to make the Messiah known among all the nations. And so what timeless truth would that be based upon? Certainly in the story, they're addressing the Samaritans. So the story is not telling us, okay, we need to go find a Samaritan and share the gospel with them. No, that was specific to the story and the original people involved. But certainly the timeless truth would be that, you know, Christ has a mission for the church that we are to be pursuing ourselves. And so, and that is to all the nations. So like I said, I think the best way to express the timeless truth here is given explicitly in the Great Commission. We're to make disciples of all the nations. And so that's why I based the sermon main point, I had that idea incorporated in it, and then tried to make it directed towards my hearers. And like I said, I would need to work at making this more memorable in the future. But yeah, I like the title, Mission Acts 1:8, or something like that. That's good. All right, let's talk a little bit about the outline then. All right, again, for the sermon outline, we want to remember the author's outline, and for a narrative, I think your outline should follow the scenes of the story, because that, I believe, is the best way to tell the story, is just follow it by scene. All right, rather than well, I will hold on to that point. So I would suggest just first identifying the author's outline, which is the scenes of the story, and then taking that outline, maybe breaking it up in such a way that you're walking your hearers through the story. And so what I would do with this is I would take, let me just offer my idea for the sake of time here, have you guys think about it. So I think a sermon outline for this story, and again, I want to remember with narratives, guys, remember, I think for a narrative, you want to preach the story as a story. So I would be careful not to break it up into, 3 points, 3 doctrinal truths from the story. Okay, you can remember we're trying to emphasize, John chose to express his point in the form of a story. So I think for us as preachers, as teachers, we want to follow the author's lead and tell the story. And then, of course, we can add important information and context and details as we go along to help our hearers be able to, so that it help them to understand the story as the original hearers would have understood it. But you're gonna I believe the best way to preach a story is to tell the story. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But so what I would do, and I think this is what I did when I preached it, is I broke down this story a little differently. I took the basic scenes, I split up scene 1 into 2 parts just to break it down a little more. And I incorporated the first part of scene 1 into the setting. So I read the first 9 verses, and then I think, let me see, got my sermon pulled up here. Yeah, well, I read the first 6 verses just to give the setting of the story, and then read the next 3 verses as part of that setting, just to set up Jesus's conversation with the woman. And then I split the rest of scene 1 into 2 parts, where he talks about the living water and then the true worship. But how I did it was maybe I even broke these verses up into smaller pieces, again trying to tell the story rather than just, a lot of times guys will read the whole narrative and then come back and go through the narrative, whereas I like to do it in the form, I generally don't read the whole story at the beginning. I'll just start the way we start when we're reading it ourselves. You know, we read, then we see the setting, the story usually, and then, so that's how I would choose to preach it, so that you want to be engaging. And and that, so we'll talk more about that in a minute. So this is how I broke up the story, and I didn't give outline points either, which again is another thing I want to talk about when it comes to preaching narratives. All right. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. Just want to talk about some key principles for preaching narratives. Okay. And maybe I'll start with giving you guys opportunity to, you know, how do you think narratives should be preached, or maybe ask a better question. What principles do you think we should consider when preaching narratives? How about that?
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Don't preach it like you preach an epistle.
You know, and what do you mean by that?
Tell the story. Yeah, tell the story. I mean, tell the story. By, well, I don't know if this is another principle, but by letting the audience see the clear flow of the story.
Good. Yeah, I think that's a key principle. Don't preach it like an epistle, and by that I assume you mean don't turn it into, you know, 3 doctrinal points
Right.
or propositions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, as I was saying a moment ago, right, a narrative, again, the Holy Spirit has intentionally chosen to communicate, you know, with the human author. They've intentionally chosen to communicate a theological principle in the form of a story.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's the Holy Spirit led genre. Okay. Again, remember the whole Bible was not written like an epistle. The Bible was not written as a systematic theology book, right?
Mm-hmm.
God didn't just say, okay, here's a systematic theology. So if you want to know about salvation, I've got a chapter on salvation. Here's a chapter on justification, and here's a chapter on the end times. That's not how he gave us the truth, his truth, right? He gave us his truth in a book that is a collection of books and written in different ways. So why did he do that, and how should that affect how we preach from those various books? Well, I think my opinion is certainly every book is presenting a doctrinal truth or truths, and we understand that, but the way those truths are expressed is done differently. You have poetry, right? You have narratives, you have epistles, you've got prophetic passages, you've got different ways that truth is expressed. And I believe that's intentional. And I believe that should be a guide for us as we preach through those various types of books, that we need to recognize that the truth was given intentionally in a particular way, right? And we need to take that into account as we preach through that. So if you have a story, I think if God intended for that truth to be given in the form of a story, we should do that as well. All right. Now, the challenge is you'll have many doctrinal truths within that story. And we've talked about this before, but I think if initially, if I'm just preaching a passage for the, to a congregation, and it's the first time I'm preaching that particular story, I'm going to tell the story. I think they need to understand the point of the story first. And then, of course, we can come back and deal with particular doctrines that come out from the story in later messages. But yeah, I like how you said that, Robbie. Let the audience see the flow of the story. It's so powerful if your hearers, the congregation can experience the unfolding of that, the point of the story as we experience it in studying it. That's why, and often, and that leads us to another principle when considering narratives is should we tell the main point of the story at the beginning or the end? What do you guys think? Okay, we need a sermon main point. All right, that you have to have. What are you aiming at? And that needs to be based upon the author's main point. But the question is, do we, with a sermon and an epistle, we'll tell that main point at the beginning, right? And then show that in the rest of the message. That's called a deductive sermon. All right, where you give the statement, the main point up front, and then the rest of the sermon supports that or shows that main point. So that's what we would say is a deductive sermon. An inductive sermon is where the main point is you unfold it as the sermon progresses, and that you reveal it. It's revealed at the end. So what do you guys think? Should we tell the main point at the beginning or at the end?
Can we answer that by saying it depends on what you want to and on how you want to impact your audience with the sermon, your hearers with the sermon?
Yeah.
Because isn't it possible also, Tim, to, let's say, if you choose to do it in the beginning, you can repeat the main point in the end for emphasis? It's possible to do that too, right?
Sure. Yep. I don't think there's a right, wrong answer here. I just wanted to get, have us discuss this a little bit. Maybe what are the advantages of each approach? So yeah, if you give it at the beginning, you can emphasize repeat the main idea, which would be helpful for your hearers to remember it. What else? What else might be some advantages of giving the main idea, main point at the beginning of the sermon? Anybody have a?
You can talk to the person that you wanted the preaching to be directed to in the whole preaching. Just kidding, Pastor Tim.
Today we're going to learn John chapter 4. I have a message directed for BJ. So BJ, you need to listen. Yeah. But, kidding aside, you can, make it directed from the beginning so that, the hearers are sort of confronted with or have to deal with, what are they going to, the main point is aimed at them. It's directed from the very beginning. That is calling them to, how are they going to respond as they see the story unfold? Any other advantages to giving the main point at the beginning?
You prepare the hearers for what you want to emphasize so that they'll be anticipating it.
Yes. Now, sometimes I have done sort of a partial reveal of the main point at the beginning, where, like, for example, I think I preached Jonah at Guiding Light a few years ago, but I'll give a partial reveal that, Jonah is about God's compassion, the compassion of God. So that's the general topic, but then the directed nature of the main point, I don't give until the very end. When God asks Jonah that question, how can I not show compassion on? And so I sort of I open up the idea a little bit at the beginning so that people know, this is going to talk about God's compassion for the lost. But then at the very end, Jonah, the story of Jonah, then turns toward the reader and say, now, what about you? Do you have compassion for the lost? So that's another strategy or approach, is you may reveal part of the idea at the beginning. Right. And then fully reveal it at the end. That's maybe a third option. Tell part of the main point at the beginning and then the rest at the end. That's another approach. How about at the end? What are some advantages to waiting till the end to express the main point or the main idea of the sermon?
It gives it can give a very impactful conclusion. To the sermon. I don't know how to explain this, but it would be like an aha moment sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that's I think the power of a story, is when you come to the end of the story and then it becomes clear what the point is, and you're like, oh. And that's you know what? That in itself can help your main point be memorable. Even if you don't word the main point well, if you sort of wait and let the story reveal that main point at the end, it can be memorable just because of doing it that way. So even if you don't have a cleverly expressed main point to be memorable, you can make it memorable just in how you tell the story and reveal that. Like it's like the story of Joseph, right? I mean, the main point isn't given till the end by Moses. And so it's like, oh, when he talks about you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. That's the theme of those chapters. It's like, oh, but if you tell that up front, it's sort of, it can take away that aha moment, if you will. So in today's passage, we're going to see how God's providential control, that in the life of Joseph and how he used the, evil events in Joseph's life for good. Well, you kind of taken away a little bit of that impact.
Spoiler.
What's that?
Yeah, just like a spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Yeah. Yeah, right. Isn't that a bummer, right? If someone tells you that, the twist ending and you know about it in the front, that totally changes how you experience the story.
But Tim, in that example that you just used, we can do what you did with Jonah, right? Just have a partial reveal in that Joseph story, right? Where you could just simply say that here we will see the sovereignty of God operating, and then use the Genesis 50 verse 20, is it?
Yeah, 50-20, and then he mentions it also in in Genesis 40-45, I think. But yeah, 50-20 is the real summary statement. Yeah, sometimes you might want to give sort of the general topic at the beginning, but then sort of I think the twist or the focus that you aim towards your hearers, again, that the author of the story has a message for his audience, right? He has a point to the story that he's trying to communicate to his audience. And so I think you can sort of give part of the idea of the topic, saying, in Joseph's case, the sovereignty of God, or in Jonah, the compassion of God, or Ruth, the providence of God. So you could kind of mention that as a general topic, but not really give the turn towards the hearers until the end, so that still they can experience the impact of that. Any other thoughts about the advantages or the advantages of giving the main idea at the end of the sermon? Anybody else have a thought? Renee, what do you think?
For me, Pastor Tim, it create excitement, since this is a story, create excitement and encourages the listener to listen what be the main point of the story.
Yes, and this is why, brothers, and this might go to the next, the next topic here is the art of storytelling. One of I think an effective way, because you bring up a good point, Renee, is the keeping your hearers engaged, and that happens if you are good at telling the story. All right. So one of the things, and then I'll ask you guys for your ideas. One thing that I like to do when I tell a story is ask questions as you go through the story. Ask questions like, now why would the narrator have said that? Or why did Jesus do this? Or did you notice how this word seems to keep coming up in the story? Why is that? So just kind of have questions, so you're leading them towards the main idea, and you're sort of keeping them attentive, like give them a question to be thinking about as the story continues. Like in John 4, when the woman goes back to the city and tells the people there about the Messiah, you might want to stop and ask, now, I wonder why John threw that in. Why did he mention that here, you think? Just give some questions that will kind of encourage the hearers to be thinking about that. And then as the story progresses, then they'll see those questions be resolved. Or in John 9, you know, we talk about John inserts the comment, right? You remember he sends the blind man to the pool of Siloam. So I might say something like, why does John mention that here? What's the is there any significance to it? Keep that in mind. We'll come back to it. And then later, when I mention that Siloam, notice he says Siloam means sent. He says that in the text. Later on, we can come back and say, now, understanding the importance in that story that Jesus is the sent one, and he sent the blind man, that you can, you know, as the story progresses, answer some of the questions that you bring up. But I find questions are a helpful tool in telling the story, keeping your hearers engaged. How about what are some other effective techniques in telling a story?
Try to help your hearers visualize what is happening, and by following the how do I say this, the mood changes in every scene. I don't know if I'm using the right term. Like I just preached on David and Goliath first, when I was preaching the actual battle very differently from the other parts that came before and after it. So I wouldn't just use one. I'm not sure if I'm expressing it clearly. I'm not just using one tone or mood for the whole chapter.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. At certain parts of the story, if it's more active, more emotional, more or less, you know, activity, that you're just trying to match what's going on there. I think I understand what you're saying. You know, if in the story all of a sudden something serious happens, then you have a serious tone. Or if the story changes in its pace, you know, like in David and Goliath, there's sort of a part there where David rushes toward, you know, the giant's described, and then David rushes towards the giant, you know, and, you know, there's some anticipation there, like what's going to happen. And you can even express that, you know, as, you know, David picks up the stones, and as he rushes towards the giant, everyone's wondering, you know, they're thinking this is going to be a quick battle, you know, and so you can really match the pace and the excitement of the story. That's important, actually.
Tim, can I?
Yeah.
May I add that you can use a little dramatization in describing that. That's what I did with that scene, from David rushing towards Goliath, picking up a stone from his pouch and swinging that sling, releasing the stone, and all the way till that point where he beheads Goliath. I felt that was very effective in keeping the hearers engaged.
Yes. Yeah, I'd say this is the one place where it's appropriate in the service to dramatize a little. All right. We want to be careful. We don't want to overdo it, but you know, as you read the dialogue, you know, don't read everybody with the same tone. All right. Try to anticipate a little bit, you know, what the tone might have been, and express that. If you're going to, you know, if you're reading the dialogue, right? If we're here, you know, reading from this story in John, right? There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away to the city. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I'm a Samaritan woman?" Don't read it in the same tone. I mean, and don't use a woman's voice either, by the way, if you're gonna. How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me? Don't do that, because
Hey, that's Minnie Mouse.
So there are some boundaries, because if you do that, then everyone will be laughing just like you guys were, and they won't follow the story. But you will want to try to match the tone. So you might say, the Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink? I'm a Samaritan woman. Okay, right. See, that kind of thing. And then the narrator, for Jews have no dealing with Samaritans. So Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So the intonation, how would a person say it? We don't talk to each other with just a flat tone. There's emphasis. And this is why you need to know the story well, because you don't want to misrepresent, like verse 11, she said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water?" I don't know that that's how she said it.
I don't think so either.
But you would want to use, intonation. "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? You're not greater than our father Jacob, are you?" So that kind of thing. You guys get what I'm saying. But it's important to do our best to, again, match the tone. It's matching the tone, or attempting to do that. So obviously some of that's hard to do because we weren't there. We didn't hear them actually say it. But if you understand the point of the passage well, and you understand how each scene is put together, I think you'll do a pretty good job of matching how it was said. But that's part of it, telling a story. You want to be engaging just in the way you tell it. Okay. I've heard a lot of guys read stories, and it's just like, this is boring, just how you read it. Or like poetry, same thing. Guys read a poem like an epistle, and it's like, well, no. That the nature of the genre demands that we try to match the tone as well. So long way to express, but yeah, I think using dramatization and just being careful, but be careful not to overly dramatize or embellish. All right. Sometimes for the sake of humor, we might do something in the story that, shouldn't be a point of humor. I think I told you about the time, maybe I didn't. One of my assignments in my doctor ministry program was we had to listen to some bad sermons. And one of the sermons we had to listen to was a guy who is known for being a good storyteller. But he's not very accurate. And he was doing a message. The sermon was on Exodus 32, golden calf. And he began the message. The introduction to his sermon is he went up. This was like in a chapel service at a university, a Christian college. So he went up and he starts playing the piano. There's a piano in the room. So the beginning of his sermon is actually, he went up and he's playing some jazz number on the piano. He's just for about 3-4 minutes. And then he goes up to preach. So the tone is totally just sort of laid back, and he's going to preach on the golden calf incident.
Oh my.
So he's already set a mood of like, it's very light, very, not serious. And then he starts preaching and he's telling jokes all the way through his sermon. And it's like, his content was horrible too, but just even in the tone, I mean, that of any event in the Bible, that's one of the most serious, sober stories in
Absolutely.
Scripture, right?
Mm.
I mean, here, God's people had just been delivered from Egypt, and here they are in a big sex party and worshiping a fault, making an idol out of Yahweh, and I mean, just doing the most horrific things. And then, of course, God brings judgment, right? Where he tells them to kill their fellow Israelites. I mean, this is a horrible circumstance where we see sin and God's response to it. And so there should not be a joke in that sermon at all. That's one story that's not funny. Nothing about it's funny. Maybe the one ironic statement, that when Aaron was saying, I threw the gold in to the fire and out came this calf, as he's trying to deflect the blame. That might get a little bit of a chuckle, and maybe that's Moses, the author's intent there a little bit, how silly that was. But besides that story, there's nothing about it that's funny. So you want to match the tone. All right. Now, other stories, there are humorous parts. When Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, right? He's saying, hey, as they're gashing themselves and crying out, he says, hey, maybe he's asleep, or maybe he's in the CR, I think Elijah was intentionally trying to be sarcastic. That is funny, because the worship of false idol is ridiculous. And so Elijah was exposing that. So you could match that, but just, be careful. I couldn't, this guy's sermon was horrible. And he ended up justifying that, by the way, the behavior of the Israelites, saying, he said, I can understand why they did this, because God wasn't talking to them. He was absent, and of course, then they're going to start. It's like, that doesn't make it okay. What are you saying? I was so mad listening to that message. But we want the story, we do want to, good storyteller will utilize, sort of a dramatization or a, an effort in trying to match, tones and voices and things like that. Okay, anything else that makes for effective storytelling? We might add to this dramatization, to be lively, engaging, descriptive, right? I think you mentioned that, Robbie, just sort of helping them visualize the scene. I think that's really important. And you can do that in a lot of ways. You guys have any ideas? What would be some effective ways to help your hearers visualize the scene and get into the story? Any ideas?
Pastor Tim,
Yes.
I heard of a pastor talking about dramatization, or to create that drama, that you can use your senses. He's talking about the dedication of Jesus to the temple. And he said that what you hear as Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus at that time would help you in what you smell, the animals around for the sacrifice, even what you feel as you enter the temple. You feel cold from being warm outside. You can hear the crying of the animals and the people talking. Something like that, Pastor Tim. He said that would help. And you accurately sense, although he asked for a balance on that, but
Yeah.
it can help you create scene more dramatically.
Yeah, I still remember, Matthew 5, the passage where it says, where Jesus describes, if you have a if you're making a sacrifice and you remember someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there, go and make it right. And he kind of just described the picture, imagine yourself, you're standing in line waiting to offer sacrifice, and you've been waiting for hours in the hot sun. And then you come up right to the entrance about ready to go offer your sacrifice. And then you remember a brother has been offended by you. And so after that long day waiting, Jesus says, leave your animal there. It matters more to him that you go make things right. Anyway, the way he sort of pictured that, it's like it really was effective. Like, that this is, and what he was doing was just showing how important it was to Jesus to be right with your brother or sister. And, so he did a good job of sort of picturing that, coming to bring the sacrifice and then, leaving it there to go and make things right. And so, I think that's very effective. Even when Jesus is being laid in a manger, just he's in a manger. That's a feeding trough. There's animal. I mean, I've fed cattle. I've been around feeding troughs, and they're pretty messy, and a lot of the cow's snot and spit and stuff is in the manger. It's messy. It's gross. And there's
Cow pie.
There's cow pies everywhere. And so, I mean, again, as Renee said, you want to be careful that you don't make, this big focus on that. But at the same time, I think you can be very effective in just giving people a sense of, because, like in that scene, there's so many manger scenes and everything's all pretty and beautiful and, the star overhead, and it's like, well, I don't know if it was that glamorous, because I've, been around farm animals in their stalls, and I don't think that's quite the picture, So, all that to say, I think that's a good point. Give some idea of the sight, the sound, the smell, the different senses, as it will help you in telling the story. I think that's again, we don't want to do it. Yeah, Robbie.
Yeah. In addition to what you're saying here, in response to Rene, it will help in telling the story, and also somehow help in emphasizing the main point when you do this. Like, for example, the main point of your describing the manger scene that way really is the humility of Christ in his incarnation. So that's the whole point for giving that kind of vivid description.
Yes. Yeah, and I think, we want to use as much as we understand from the background context, because if the author doesn't go into this long description of things, then we want to be careful of how much we do that.
Right.
Okay. So again, it's that, wisdom and knowing, I need to say enough so that they will be able to see or picture what's going on, but yet not overly so that dominates the story. Because if the author didn't choose to give all those details, we want to be careful that we don't overstep the author's intent by adding a bunch of stuff that maybe he didn't intend to do. And that's the challenge, I think, with, when people make movies about stories of from the Bible, is they're trying to, present things, but they have to put in things that aren't given in the text. And sometimes they overly emphasize something that diverts you from understanding the main point. I've been watching are you guys familiar with that series, The Chosen. You heard about that?
Yeah. Mhm.
It's an American guy that is putting together like it's an episodic, like there's episodes of different parts of the life of Christ. Some of them overlap with biblical stories, and then some of them he sort of adds in. Like there's one account where he's just interacting with kids, and it's cute, you know, and it's not anything from the scripture, but I've noticed, you know, in fact, last night I watched the one on John 4, and I was, you know, pretty disappointed because it's one thing to sort of try to fill in some of the gaps as you're showing the film. I understand that, but the information that you do convey that is in the Bible, you need to be accurate with. You can't mess with what's in the text.
Right.
And a lot of these guys do that. They take artistic license with actually what's there. So like the woman at the well, he really made this story about this woman going through a hard life. And it was, anyway, it just made the emphasis on her rather than on Jesus in the story. And so it's like, and then like there's many parts that weren't included in the conversation, and they added stuff to kind of as they saw it. So anyway, it just, I think it's hard to really have a video that does a good job with biblical accounts, because it's just hard to do it accurately. So I remember I was teaching Sunday school, you know, years ago, and here in the States there was this, at the time there was a series, you know, Veggie Tales. I don't know if you've heard about that. But, it's when my kids were little is when that came out, and so I'm going through the story of Daniel with the kids. These are 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids, and so we're telling the story about it. I can't remember. I think it was the 3 men in the fire. So we're reading the Bible, and one of the kids goes, "That's not how it happened." I'm like, "What?" And he's like arguing with me because he saw Veggie Tales, and they totally changed the story. And so I'm reading it right out of the Bible, but this kid's like, because he watched a video, he's like, so I don't really like Veggie Tales. I think they don't do a good job. They add too much, and they actually change the story, the points of the story. But anyway, it just struck me then, the power of video. We have to be very careful with that. And we can do the same thing even in our preaching. We can add much more to the passage than it's intended, and that can alter the author's intended meaning if we're not careful. We can emphasize something that the author was not necessarily emphasizing. And we want to be just careful that we don't do that. So, or if we overly do stuff, you know, it then becomes about how entertaining or how effective the preacher is at telling a story rather than the story. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Can I add another one, Tim?
Certainly, yeah.
That I felt sometimes I refer to something that had happened earlier that's not part of the story, but something that we had gone through in the past. Like, for example, I would say something like, notice this. This is not the first time that Saul does this, right? Remember? And so it helps them connect that present event to the previous event, and helps
Certainly.
build the bigger picture or sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is you're interconnecting it with the rest of the bigger story. So like in John, certainly I would mention maybe, you know, the contrast or the connection to the discussion with Nicodemus as you're telling the story of the woman at the well. Say, isn't it interesting here? You know, why? And this I might do toward the end of the story, think about, now let's step back a minute and think about, why is John telling us this story? You know, this is an extended dialogue with a Samaritan woman of all people. Wasn't it interesting? You know, just just the previous one chapter earlier, he was telling a story about Jesus's gospel conversation with another person. And, so just as it's connected to the point of the story or the point of the book overall, that's a very helpful thing. And especially like in John, he does things like there's irony that he brings out about all through the gospel. And so you might point it. Now here again, we see John present something very ironic. Remember, he did that before in the story of the blind man. You might connect to a few others, but yeah, that can be very helpful just in hermeneutically helping your people be looking or understanding there's connections in the whole book. It's not just each little story by itself. It's part of a whole. So that's a good thing. Or if there's a theme, like in John, that theme of being sent, where he's building that theme over the course of the book, that you're going to want to keep your hearers attentive to that. Good. Any other thoughts or comments?
Pastor,
Yeah, Manny.
as they have said, some things are caught rather than taught. Do you have any preachers in mind who are good storytellers without overdoing it, Pastor Tim, whom you could recommend?
Yeah, Chuck Swindoll is one of the better storytellers I've heard. I wouldn't endorse, everything he's preached. I think generally he's he can overdo it a little bit, but he's good at telling stories. Walt Kaiser is a good storyteller. Haddon Robinson. Maybe I'll write these down. Because that's a good point. Maybe some good Bible storytellers. I would say, Walt Kaiser. And you can go like on sermonaudio.com, I think, and listen to these guys. Chuck Swindoll, Haddon Robinson. I heard a good sermon from him on Proverbs. He did a good job telling a story. My
Alex Montoya.
Seminary professor Alex Montoya, I think he does a good job of that. CJ Mahaney. I mean, I don't know, sort of where you stand with sort of some of the issues he's had, but as far as just storytelling, Dale Davis.
Dale Ralph Davis, right? I remember this name from our listening assignments, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, I think I did give one from him. Yeah, these guys are good storytellers as far as biblical. As far as just storytellers in general, there's an American guy, Art Linkletter, I think his name is. He's you might want to look him up. He's good at engaging people and telling stories. He's a well-known, probably from a previous generation, well-known American storyteller. I think of trying to think of who else in history, just secular. I don't know. You guys have any that come to mind? Either biblical preachers or even just secular people that are effective storytellers. Any come to mind?
How about in the Shepherd's Conference speakers, Tim? I know there were some who were good at it.
Yeah, I would say probably, I've Austin, Austin does a good job. Austin Duncan.
There was I don't remember who the speaker was who would do biographies.
Well, Steve Lawson, he does a lot of the
whole series. Yeah.
biographies of various Christian. Yeah, I think that's a good. I would say that of the ones I've heard, I would put these guys, up there as ones I would try to listen to a little bit. Again, maybe Chuck Swindoll. He's probably best known for his ability to tell stories effectively. Usually his illustrations, things like that. So if any more come to mind, I'll put them down. And so I think, guys, too, another way to improve in our storytelling is look for opportunities to teach children. If you can tell a story to a child and keep their attention, then you're doing a good job, especially younger kids. So I would, if you have kids, or that you have opportunity to do that, or if you have children in the church, just look for opportunities to tell them stories and see ways that you can engage them. Another thing I would say is know the text really well so you don't have to use your notes very much. That will allow you to be more engaging with it, because if you're looking at a manuscript as you're going through the story, that's going to dilute your effectiveness in telling that story. So know the passage well, know the story well. That'll help you be more engaging in it. I don't know, any other thoughts, maybe ways to improve your storytelling? Obviously listening to good storytellers, but telling stories to children, knowing the story well enough so you can be more extemporaneous as you teach it. Any others come to mind before we close?
I guess, Tim, it's so important also for you to personally feel what is happening in the narrative, because you can be disconnected when you're telling the story, but when you personally feel what's happening there, even here in John 4, the only way you could read correctly the first responses of the woman is if you put yourself in her place and you begin to say, now you understand. You begin to understand why she's asking this. How would you draw water from the well? You have nothing to draw with, and when you begin to personally try to be there, feel what that woman must have been feeling, may have been feeling, then that can have an impact in the way that you would tell that or read or tell that portion of the story. Because otherwise you could be so disconnected to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Where putting yourself in the shoes of or the position of those in the story, and the better you know the story, I think the better you can do that. Like, for example, I mean, think about the woman's statement when she says, right, when she goes back into the town, she says, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did." Well, did Jesus tell her whole life story at the well?
No.
I don't think so. All he did was, at least all that John told us that he did, was he exposed her greatest struggle. She was looking for fulfillment in men, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus was able to, just in that one statement that he makes, right? That, you're not living with, the man you're living with now is not your husband. You've had 5 husbands. He kind of hits her right at her key issue in life. And so it was to the point where, like, he knows me. He that's why she would say something like that. He told me everything I ever did. Well, no, he didn't. do that literally, but he did address or note kind of the key issue and struggle that she had in her life, was trying to find fulfillment or hope or satisfaction or meaning or whatever in relationships. And so I think that reveals a lot about her, you know, and here now Jesus sort of shows her that he knows her. And so that impacts her so much to see this has got to be the Messiah. So, but yeah, trying to identify with the characters in the story is very helpful as you tell it. All right, well, it's noontime. Any last comments, or this will be the last time we meet together for several weeks. So any other thoughts or comments before we close our time? Okay,
Tim?
well,
Tim, could you just in our chat group, maybe a week or so before you leave for Pakistan, could you just mention that so that we can really remember to pray for you specifically in church?
oh yeah, I'd appreciate that. Yes, I'll do that. Thank you. Well, I hope that you brothers have blessed holiday time. I've also been, was praying that doors would open for me to be able to come see you face to face. So hopefully that my desire would be to be able to do that in April or May or something, to come out there for a while, and we'll just see what where things are at. But just pray to that end as well. Love to be able to get together with you, but just may the Lord bless your time as you celebrate his birth, and hopefully things can be opened up enough where you can be able to gather with the church in that celebration. So because it's last year we didn't get to do it really, right, because of everything. So it'd be very sad if it happens again this year like that. But appreciate you, brothers. Thank you for, it's hard to believe we've been doing, this for over a year and a half now. So that's amazing how time has gone. But I hope these have been helpful. I've really
Absolutely
been blessed by our time together. So I'd like to keep doing it if you guys would like to, and I'll give you information as we get closer to that time.
Yeah. All right.
Robbie, you want to maybe close us in prayer?